Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how to change an outer tie rod end and avoid the need for an alignment afterwards. There's a few tips I can give you before you take this off, measurements and stuff like that, tips for removal so it comes off and nothing gets disturbed. And then we go back on, quick measurement, and we're set. So just stay tuned. Okay, right here is the outer tie rod end. It can be on the front side or the back side of the knuckle, but either way, it's going to connect the steering gear to the knuckle so it can control the direction of it and, of course, ultimately turn your wheels. So we want this to be out in the open. So if it's in the front here on the left side, we're simply going to turn the wheel to the left and get this whole thing out in the open here. So there's two nuts on here to hold this thing on. There's a jam nut over here, and there's a nut over here that actually bolts it to the knuckle nice and secure. What you want to do is loosen the jam nut before you ever loosen this one on here. So figure out what size it is on here. Usually they're 7/8, almost all of them. Now these trucks are a little beefier, so this one's actually a 15/16 on here. So get your open end wrench on there and hold it in place and tap it with a hammer. Now this thing, you can see, is free. They're greased pretty heavily inside of here, so usually they're not seized to the actual tie rod shaft right here. Now we can go ahead and get this one off up here. Okay, now a lot of times right here, this exposed thread, it's going to have a lot of rust on it and debris and everything on there, so you want to make sure you get that cleaned with a wire brush and some rust penetrant. So when you go to spin this nut off of here, it comes right off of here. Now a lot of times these are 18mm. Like I said, this one's beefed up, being a bigger truck. This is a 13/16 on here. So we'll take that off of there. Okay, so this may happen to you also, especially these nylon locking nuts. It broke free, great, but now it's just spinning in there. So the nut, the shaft is spinning within the bore inside here, the ball and cup. So what you got to do is use the hex holding feature right here and then continue to take this off of here. Now what's easiest on here is to put a box end wrench like that. Okay, it's going to hold it for us. Now we're going to actually spin the center shaft on here. They call this a hex holding feature. I like to actually use it to spin the nut off here. The torque is already broken on here, so you're not going to break any of your bits or your sockets or anything. So you put this on here, 10 mil, right? Holds on there. You don't loosen it though, you tighten it. And it'll do just the opposite down here. So you hold this, looks something like this. Like that, and you take it off. Knock all the garbage out of there. And then this may or may not just fall right on through there. If it's spinning already, it'll probably just fall through. Okay, so what you're going to do next is measure from the center shaft here out to any point you want on the inner tie rod shaft here. So just pick any point on here and make a mark. Make it a whole number, it'd probably be easiest. So let's go with, let's say 8 inches. Okay, we're right in there centered in the shaft. And then we're going to make a mark right here, you can see it, on the inner tie rod end here. And go ahead and recheck it, make sure it's right there in the center. Okay, we're right there in the center. Now these outer tie rod ends can vary in length and design from each manufacturer, aftermarket manufacturer. So that measurement from A to B, make sure no matter how long this is, the center point of the shaft that goes into the knuckle and the shaft on here is still the same. So that measurement for length is still the same and should pop right back into here. So the one I get usually is Motorcraft. So you can see on this one, it's the same exact design. So literally, I could loosen this nut, take this off, and put this back on, tighten the nut a little bit, jam nut on there, and be done. It's still a good idea either way to make sure you measure from point A to point B, because the threads on here can be a little bit different, even with the Motorcraft ones on here. So at this point, the jam nut's loosened. We have our measurement, most important. We can hold this, and we can literally just turn it off of here. And you see how bad this one is? Look at it. I shouldn't be able to do that. So we'll turn this off of here. Like I said, there's going to be some kind of anti-seize or grease inside of there, I see a lot of times. Okay, so we know the jam nut on here is a close set point. So we'll get to that. We'll have the stud facing up, and we'll make sure you measure for that 8 inches from A to B. Right about there, okay. Now, let's measure. There to there. Boom, boom. Nice and easy, perfect. And this is the real reason, besides quality, that I get the outer tie rod ends from Motorcraft. They're a little more expensive, but it's so easy to avoid an alignment afterwards with them. But you can use this measurement technique, A to B, and you can avoid it with just about any other manufacturer also. So at this point, don't touch the jam nut. Leave it alone. We're set. We're pointing up. We're at 8 inches. Good. Now stick it right back into here. Don't worry, your measurement can't get off on there. It's set at this point. Okay. Now the threads on here are obviously clean, okay? And our nut, make sure you clean with brake clean. Now probably the most important part of this job is making sure this nut cannot back off of here. This nut right here. Now the older vehicles, they use castellated nuts and a cotter pin, so you torque them down, put your cotter pin through. There's no way pretty much it's backing off and falling off of there. These new ones, for speed and ease, they use locking and nylon nuts. See that insert in the middle there? That's the locking nylon. And what it does is when you power it onto there, it actually heats up and then it cools and it forms around the threads and makes sure it cannot back off on there. So that's kind of used up by now. It still does it just a little bit. So what you want to use is make sure that if you're reusing this to clean it up, I do recommend to change it out with a new one from Ford. But you want to use Loctite on here, and I recommend blue at least, red on these bigger trucks, okay? So I got plenty on there. We're going to tighten it on down. Do it by hand like that at first to make sure that there's not cross thread. Like I said, you want to get a true torque reading on here when you're done and torque it down properly. Now what you do is use an impact if you have one, or by hand, and you push up on here and you give pressure so that the shaft in here does not spin before it starts locking down and putting pressure against here. After that, this is not going to spin anymore. It's just fine. So we can go ahead and tighten it down, snug it down. About there. So as you can imagine, the torque spec on here for each vehicle is different. That's a very important spec to know, so you make sure that not only is the thread locker holding it, but also the fact that you're torquing it down, giving those threads a little bit of a stretch like that. So this one's 111 foot-pounds, and it's 03 Expedition. So we're going to torque it down. And we're going to go ahead and torque this down before we start jerking around with anything else here. Make sure we don't forget. Alright, nice and torqued. Now this jam nut over here, now that everything's back together, we can just tighten it, snug it up, a couple hits of the hammer. Alright, that's it. That's all there is to changing an outer tie rod end on Ford vehicles. Now, of course, this procedure applies to a lot of other makes and models out there, but I want to show the style outer tie rod ends and the nuts that Ford uses so I can give you my little tips and tricks on getting them back together and securing them safely. The biggest thing being the A to B measurement. Like I said, you can make it any number as long as the A is over here and the B is on the inner tie rod end over here. Make it an even number so it's easy to remember. Like you saw on this one, it's very easy. 8 inches, done. And we got it back together, secured, and it should only take about 15 minutes to do this, and you can avoid the cost of an alignment like I said.